thank you all for joining us on our webinar this month. I'm Derek Hensley, and I have the pleasure of introducing Matt Syverson. We're both financial advisors here at Sound Stewardship. We're a fee-only financial planning firm based out of Overland Park, Kansas. And so we're so happy to have you all join us for a fun discussion today around preparing the next generation for wealth. And so, Matt, what are some things we need to, as we're going into this conversation, what are some assumptions, kind of lay the groundwork for where we're starting and where we're hoping to end today?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Derek. So excited to share some information today with a wonderful group on the call. And we've got a diverse mix of folks on the call from different age groups and backgrounds. And so I think you're really going to enjoy the approaches that we're going to talk about today, that each one of you should be able to walk away with something tangible that you can do with in this concept of preparing the next generation for wealth. And we've always been working on intergenerational wealth planning between our clients. Sometimes we have generation one is the client, and sometimes generation two is the client, and sometimes generation three. But we always work between the generations to make sure we're all coordinated together. That's been coming up a lot this summer, that we've had some amazing clients that have passed away, some unexpected losses, and Derek and I and others have been working on a lot of estate transfers, and there's been mostly smooth, but we've uncovered some surprises that we'll share with you today and to help you get prepared for that too.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of case. We have a lot of case studies in our experience there. But yeah, and another thing too is as questions come up, feel free to send those our way. In the little Q&A chat box there for Zoom. So we can answer those along the way, or we might just field them at the end where we'll have a little time for Q&A. But don't hesitate to reach out with some questions there.
Yeah, happy to make it interactive. And if I can't answer the question when you ask it, I'll get back to you later.
Right.
It's okay, we'll get there. But maybe, Derek, some other assumptions for the folks on the call today is we're primarily going to be focusing on how to talk to your adult children.
Yeah.
We love your minor children as well, or minor grandchildren, but we're primarily going to focus on adult to adult conversations first. And assuming we have a wonderful time of discussion today, Derek and I might do more presentations on adult to children or adult to grandchildren as we go along. But I think that's important to understand, first of all. The other is we're assuming the folks on the call do have assets that they're wanting to transfer. The most recent statistics are the baby boomers are about to transfer over $84 trillion to the next generation during their lifetime. So there's a lot of money flowing down to the generations. And remember, we refer to it as G1, G2, and G3. So generation one might be you or the oldest in the group we're talking about. Generation two would be your children, and generation three would be your grandchildren. So if you hear me say G1, G2, G3, that's common vernacular for how we'll talk about the generations. So we're most likely going to talk about G1 and G2 today and pepper in some G3 here and there, especially if you have adult grandchildren in your lives. It's also going to be mostly a relational discussion today, not a technical discussion. So if you were hoping to show up for laws and statutes and all the tax strategies known to man, today's not your day. We'll get to that in another discussion, but today is all about relational, and I'll share with you why in one of my quotes later on. But we're going to be asking you to kind of self-evaluate where you're at with your relationships and your communication style with your children, and give you some helpful resources for how to have this money talk with them on wealth transfer. Okay. So to get started, I thought we'd provide some different messages you might be hearing out there in the public or from the learnings that you've done over time on what does inheritance mean and what do we do with all this money during our lifetime and after lifetime. So we'll start with the great philosopher Denzel Washington, where he says, "You'll never see a U-Haul behind a hearse." Derek, have you seen this happen?
I have not seen it happen yet. I think a lot of people might want it to happen, but I haven't seen it play out yet.
you cannot take it with you.
Right.
So then we move to uh, some ancient biblical wisdom, which is from Proverbs, where we hear a good person leaves an inheritance for their children's children, but a sinner's wealth is stored up for the righteous. And back in that time, it was all about transferring land and real
Mm,
estate to the next generation.
yeah.
These days, we have all kinds of parts and pieces that we're trying to transfer. So it's a
Yeah.
little bit more complicated these days, but that was some encouragement from back then.
Yeah. Land and livestock. That still can be a thing, but
Yeah.
it's definitely gotten more complex now.
Correct. Yeah. Um, then we move to an author, Randy Alcorn, who wrote a wonderful little book called The Treasure Principle, where he helps us, reminds us, not only can't you take it with you, but you can send it on ahead. I mean,
Mm,
you can give to the charities and causes you're fired up about today before you pass away, so you can see that cause coming to fruition, or kind of see that endeavor being accomplished during your lifetime through a particular charity that you're fired up about. Back to Proverbs, a little bit of a caution. An inheritance obtained too early in life is not a blessing in the end.
yeah.
So this is where, yeah, that intergenerational transfer of wealth is good. However, if it's obtained too early, that's not going to be a blessing in the end. That could derail the younger family member instead of helping them.
Yeah.
Okay,
And
now we
who's
get
to
to,
say what too early is, right? And so
yeah,
it's going to be different for everybody. So we'll kind of explore that.
yeah. Now, we're out of Kansas City, but here's the Oracle of Omaha, Warren Buffett, saying, you should leave your children enough so they can do anything, but not enough so they can do nothing.
Yeah.
This is kind of the sweet spot that we try to get to as parents, to make sure we don't disconnect their will to their drive to work,
Right.
or their drive to provide for the family, or if you're providing to the daughter who doesn't work, does that cause the son-in-law who was working to stop working,
Yeah.
jealous of the daughter who received the money? So
Right.
there's a lot of relational issues that can happen depending on who gets the resources. Another one of our friends, Ron Blue, wrote a wonderful book on estate transfer called Splitting Heirs. And he's suggesting, do your giving while you're living so you're knowing where it's going. And we fully embrace this concept because we know you want to have good relations with your family. Isn't it so much more meaningful to provide some wealth to them prior to your death, to see how much they enjoyed, or what memories can you create together
Yeah.
because you're sharing with them? Okay. This goes not only for the loved ones that we provide resources to during a lifetime, but also to charities. Okay. That send it on ahead concept. We can see how the charity uses the resources that we used to wait until death to give to them. Now
Hmm.
we can see it during our lifetime, which could be really meaningful for you. Now here's another interesting philosopher, me. Growing up in this industry, my dad's grew up with my dad as a financial advisor, still is. He started in 1972. I was born in 71, so I've grown up with it my whole life. Uh, when I jumped into the business in 2000, before I founded Sound Stewardship, there's a lot of talk about legacy, 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 legacy. And you were the big differentiator as a financial advisor if you talked about legacy. But ultimately, what it turned into is, how could the life insurance agent sell more life insurance to dump more money on the kids? That was intended to be the legacy. And I quickly realized that an inheritance without a relationship is not a true legacy.
Yeah.
That's just stuff that gets dumped on somebody, which may or not be helpful. So today we're going to get more. Let's focus on the relationship, which is that's the most powerful, the most valuable thing that there can be. The stuff is there, and we need to effectively transfer it, but let's focus on the relationships first. Lastly, a big perspective of a lot of our clients is God owns it all. So that comes from Psalm 24:1. The earth is the Lord's and everything in it. The world and all its people belong to him. So at Sound Stewardship, we believe God owns everything, everything around us that we're transferring between humans. He owns it. And we're simply the stewards to determine where that goes next. And so the great task is to figure out, how does God want me to provide for my children and grandchildren, the generations like Proverbs we're talking about, but also what are the charitable causes that he wants me to lean into, and knowing that I can't take it with me. There's a far greater reward in heaven than anything we could have on earth. But what do I do with it while I'm here and before I leave? Okay. So how we're going to help you prepare for this is learn about the 3 A's and our 7 sound stewardship principles. All right. You're going to understand your abilities for what to do with your resources. You're going to know your audience. That might be generation 2, that might be generation 3, or you might be generation 2 talking to generation 1. You might be the child talking to an adult parent. Okay. And then we're going to have various approaches based on your style. And then, but all of it's underpinned by our 7 sound stewardship principles that look like this. Um, the first 5 are they build upon each other to help you be as sturdy as possible, where you're living within your means, you're becoming debt free, you got reserves in the bank. We have and that are actually earning interest these days. You've got a long-term plan that you've built with sound stewardship, so you know what it's going to work, and then we're going to be diversified along the way. But our 6th principle and 7th is what we're leaning into today, which is let's think beyond ourselves. Now that we know we're sturdy and taken care of, through God's provision, now how do we think about others in our lifetime? Those are the family members. It could be friends, neighbors, other humans that we're trying to support. Mm-hmm. And then also giving generously from a charitable perspective, not only to the family, but also to the charities that we care about. We feel like giving generously just encapsulates all the different concepts. That's the culmination of our work and planning together, is how do we give generously to our family and to the charities that are involved in our life. Okay, so those are the 7 principles that we know sound stewardship clients are embracing, but this might be a great starter for how we talk about that with your family members. Okay. Mm-hmm. So here's what I'm calling a continuum of choices. And with all the people on the call today and future listeners, you're coming into today with you've probably made a choice as to how you want to transfer assets. You just don't realize it yet. But the most common one we hear is, you know what, Derek, I'm just going to give this to my children equally. I want to be fair. I don't want any squabbling. It just is what it is. And this is commonly the default. Equally, I want to be fair. Okay, we hear that all the time. On the flip side, what we're seeing a ton of this summer and over the years is that there's beneficiaries that have some special needs and some clear differences from what how your generation handle resources. For example, I have a daughter with Down syndrome, and she's going to be blessed with that condition the rest of her life. So there's a built-in special need that she has in terms of receiving dollars. Our other 3 children who don't have special needs will not need that same treatment. Okay, but Lily does, and so that's an easy one to pick on. But you might have all typical children that have very different lifestyles, very different approaches. So we need to determine what are the amounts and safeguards we might blend in. So our friend Ron Blue says, love them all equally, but treat them uniquely. And so if you haven't heard that today, this might be the first time you've been given permission that you can break out of the equal trap. It doesn't have to be equal.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point, because a lot of times when we're talking with clients, it feels like, oh, I'm just going to do it equal. And they're not even opening up the possibilities of exploring other options. And so it's like, yeah, you give yourself the space to kind of say, okay, yes, that's an option, but let's really think through these other scenarios that we could deploy here. For example, like wanting to be fair, like I've seen times where treating all children equally, actually, it seems fair, but then when you ask one kid, it's like, well, no, I did all this work in the family business. Why am I now splitting this asset with the other siblings that didn't want anything to do with it? Look at all the blood, sweat, and tears I put into this part of the plan, and now I got to share that. It's like, oh, well, that's a good point. So there's a tension there where it could be perceived fair to Gen 1, and then Gen 2 says, well, it's equal, but it's not fair.
Yeah.
So just wrestling with that.
Yeah, and it's a careful dance. So, and every family is going to be a little bit different. But one thing we certainly want to talk about is if you've been giving to charities all during your lifetime, keep doing that. But you might incorporate your charities as a child. So, for example, I've got 4 kids. If I add Tammy and I's charitable interests as a 5th child, through what's called a donor advised fund. Now, instead of dividing my estate up, let's go back to number one, 25% each. I had the charity as a child. Now I'm going 20% each. And the fifth child is our donor, the Syverson Family Foundation, that dollars go in there. The 20% of the estate goes there to then dole out to charities as we want to. Okay. On the flip side, you might say, nuts to the kids, they're doing fine. I'm fired up about these particular causes. All of my stuff is going to the charity when I'm gone. Okay, that's a conclusion you can make as well. Because remember, you are the steward of these resources. The kids don't own it, nor did they create it. We love your kids. We love your grandkids.
Yeah.
Know that. However, these are your resources that you're stewarding. And if you decide they're fine, they don't need anymore, you can give it all to charity. Okay, you can do that.
Yeah. And Matt, you mentioned the donor advice fund. What's nice about that is you can still have the kids involved with the giving to charity.
Yeah. So if Tammy and I's 20% went to our Syverson Family Foundation, we can have the four children dole it out over time based on what they knew the family cared about.
Mhm.
So they can still be involved. They can't spend it on gas and food and clothes, but they can still support the charities that we care about. Okay. Some of you might be coming in today where you're like, kids, I'm going to spend every last dime on the day I die. You'll have enough to pay for the hearse, not the U-Haul, but enough to pay for the hearse, but then there's nothing left. And that might mean success to you. Okay, that's great, but we need to communicate that appropriately to them. And what we don't see very often in our firm, but we hear about it around us, and what people are trying to avoid is, what if I run out of money before I die and become a burden to my children? 99% of our clients don't want to do this. And so we're working to make sure through the 7 sound stewardship principles that our clients are sturdy and prepared and able to take care of themselves so that the children don't have to be burdened with it. So there could be other choices along the way, but this is a little continuum for today. Okay, so let's talk about understanding your abilities as the parents, or whether you're still married or you're a widow or widower, you were the parent at some level. If you do not have children, that's okay. Then we're gonna talk about your abilities to help charity. So that's bolt on the charity as a child. Okay. So first, working with sound stewardship, we've helped you understand what assets are we even talking about. Is it land and real estate? Is it livestock? Is it 401ks? Is it stocks, mutual funds, and bonds? What are the different contraptions that you have access to that eventually will pass down? And how much of that do you want to pass down? And then there's this discussion of how much should each receive? And it's okay to identify, hey, I'd like a minimum of X amount to go to my kids. But have you ever thought about the maximum amount that you'd want to go to the kids? We absolutely have families in our client base that have said, you know what, even if my estate's 10 million, I'm giving no more than 1 million to my 3 children. Okay, so 3 million goes to the 3 kids, 7 million goes to charity. The government's basically cut out of the deal. There's no tax to pay on that, and away we go. Okay. So it's okay to identify a minimum that you want to help them with, but it's also okay, if you haven't heard this before, it's okay to set a maximum. So, and let's acknowledge the differences, not only, like Lily with Down syndrome, that difference isn't going to go away, but there also might be some relational differences, some behavior differences with how they've handled money over time. Now that we're all adults, you can see how those your children are utilizing money in their lives, and you may or may not like how that's looking. Okay. What about those in-laws? So sometimes we call them the outlaws, but the in-laws, we probably love them to death, but commonly the estate plan says it flows down the bloodline.
Yeah.
So if you and your adult child pass away, then it would skip the in-law and go to generation 3, typically is how that would work. So if you really, really, really love your in-laws, you'll have to put in a special provision of what goes to them within the estate plan. Otherwise, it's going to bypass them typically. Okay. And so there's lots on the technical side, there's lots of different ways to protect the money from the in-laws or to include the money for the in-laws, but let's get them in the conversation. One exercise we want you to do is to think about, based on your children and what you have available, is what would happen if 25% of your estate went to them today? What's the best outcome for that? And on the flip side, what's the worst outcome? And kind of do a pre-planning of what you think might happen. This is your prediction. And if the bests look really great, okay, lean into that. But if the worsts are a much longer list than the bests, you might think about adjusting the amount that's coming to them. Then we're back to the maximum, some other special guardrails. But that's just an easy exercise to think about. And as if you're still married, have the spouses do that separately. So if $1 million is going to Billy, what does the wife think's the best and worst outcomes? And what does the husband think the best and worst outcome? Okay. As the children age and are around you more and kind of see what you have available potentially because they're experiencing it with you, they have developed expectations about wealth transfer that they may not have shared with you yet. So that's one thing we try to uncover in these conversations over time is what do they think is going to happen? Are they completely clueless? Are they thinking that a lot more is coming than is actually coming? Or are they spot on with here's what's going to happen because you've been very clear with them? But they've got expectations. Let's just figure out how to get them at the right level. So the other thing to give you some freedom around is you don't have to wait till death to give this to them. The greatest generation, which is older than the baby boomers, commonly held on to it because they went through the Depression. So I'm going to hang on to every dime I can in case I need it. Okay, and then at death, the big exhale, and then the transfer happens. The boomers are a little bit more willing to share during their lifetimes. And so if you've only thought about an at-death distribution, it's okay to think about what could be possible during life. I'm not saying drain your accounts. Don't hear that. But even $1,000 here and there could really change the life of your single daughter who needed tires for her car. That could be a game changer for her. Okay. Don't forget about your charities within this estate plan and the discussion alongside of the kids. It's not an either or, charities versus kids. It's in combination. And then what controls do you want to have in place? You can get to the point where we can control these assets from the grave for you through different trust arrangements and legal language. At the same time, you might say, you know what? I'm gone. Whatever they do with it, they do with it. Okay. Now we got to be careful about our kids with special needs. Don't get me wrong, but let's determine what controls do you or don't you want to have in place based on the condition of the next generation. And lastly, our hope and prayer would be that after discussion and after going back and forth, you would become aligned as spouses, or whoever you're working with to transfer your wealth. There's some alignment as to what to do next.
Yeah.
If the husband and wife are in great disagreement as to what happens next, stop. We need to get that resolved one way or another with a third party. It's commonly sound stewardship, but it might be through counseling and some other things. But I'd hate to have an estate plan put together where it's completely out of alignment with what each party wanted. Okay. So we tend to be the referee or the mediator to kind of reach a good conclusion there. So next, we're going to have a fun exercise to identify your style. So what we're going to talk about is your parenting style from when generation 2 was growing up. Okay. And then, and what's been the effect on that over time now that generation 2 is an adult. And so this comes from research from the 60s. Do you remember the 60s? So Diana Baumrind identified what were the 4 typical parenting styles and also identified some of the effects on the child. And then over the recent 60 years, there's been a lot more research coming out from very different providers on Diana's research to help us know more about what to do next as the kids are now adults. Okay. So first of all, I'm going to share with you this grid that Dr. Ashley Sutherland put together for one of her presentations. And this is, we're comparing responsiveness, your responsiveness to the child versus your demandingness. You got to think back to when generation two was 0 to 18 years old or so. Think about on the x-axis, how demanding were you of them? The highs over here, lows over here, or how responsive were you to their needs? Highs up here, lows over here. So that's our x and y axis. I'm going to start clockwise and just kind of explain how these four typical things, you're not getting labeled today, but see if any of this resonates with you. You might have been the authoritative parent where you're going to come alongside, have some discussions, let them make some mistakes, but then talk to them about it. There was probably discipline, there's probably some limits, but we're going to work through it together. I would have called this collaborative. Authoritative still seems a little controlling, but I would have called this collaborative. But the point is, there's a balance. There's some warmth with some boundaries, warmth with boundaries, and kind of teaching them and helping them learn over time. Going down to the authoritarian, this is under my roof. These are my rules. This is what you're going to live by until you move out of this house. This is how it goes. But why? Because I said so. That's why. Have you ever said that? I think I might have said that.
I might be guilty too.
Yeah, I think we're all guilty of that at
Yeah.
some level,
Yeah.
on some discussion. But high level of control and strictness, little attention to the to the child's need. Okay, this is not a warm or responsive interaction. This is my way or the highway. Deal with it. Okay, then tears happen and resentment and blah 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 builds up. Okay. Then we get into the uninvolved parent. Now, here's where you might have been there but uninvolved, or you may have been cut out of the picture early on for whatever reason and became uninvolved. But the point is, for whatever reason, you weren't there to be able to guide the child. Okay, that you were absent or passive. You were disengaged from what was happening with the child to the point where they kind of had to figure it out on their own. They might feel neglected. They might be not know what to do even as an adult because they didn't have a strong rudder growing up. But well, I'm sorry if that resonates or resembles how you were, but it's not too late to help resolve that over time. Okay, and lastly is the permissive parenting style. This is where you want to be best friends with your kids. And trust me, I want to have great relationships with my kids, but if we try to be friends, that's going to create a lot of warmth, but maybe not enough guidance. Okay. Structure may not be there enough for them. Says, whatever you want, dear, whatever makes you happy. Okay. That's the permissive parent. All right. So those are the four typical parenting styles. We aren't putting these on you, but you just kind of self-identify, how was I in my parenting style when generation two was 0 to 18? Okay. And we give a lot of grace and mercy on your ability to change out of those styles moving forward. Okay. So as generation one, as a 70-year-old, you might have shifted from authoritarian to authoritative. You might have made that shift, or you might have went from authoritarian and they flew the coop and now you're completely uninvolved. But there can be shifts in this. So we're just a lot of grace and mercy for where the shifts have taken place. But anyway, those are the four we're going to start with. So what have been the effects of those parenting styles? Okay. In general, the authoritative parenting, because it was more collaborative, it's probably going to have created healthier, more positive relationships, probably. Okay. There's probably a feeling of respect and that they're valued. There's probably a reciprocation of respect, good emotional bonds with their parents. But on the authoritarian side, when you're adult to adult now, we might be a little strained or distant. I mean, the kid, once they flew the coop, they might not have had much to do with you for a while, okay? They might be dealing with resentments, fear of you, not super close with you, because there wasn't that dialogue back and forth, okay? When the kid's growing up, that might have created lower self-esteem because they never did anything right because you were always on them and I can never please my parents, which can also create higher levels of anxiety. You tell me how that's played out in their adult life if you can possibly see that. Okay, moving on to the permissive parenting. The relationship is going to be super warm and loving. You might be best friends, and I'm not knocking that, but they might struggle with authority boundaries in other areas of their life. They might be sharing too much, might be giving away too much of themselves. Um, Self-discipline may not be there. They may not be the most responsible adult these days. Doesn't mean they can't change, but and then the uninvolved parent, this might be a very strained relationship or possibly non-existent. You may not even know how to find your child. Okay, and this is very serious. Don't want to minimize how uncomfortable this might be if you're in this spot. They might feel neglected and loved. Might have trust issues. Wouldn't understand why you're reaching out. So we've got some hills to climb if you landed in this spot. On purpose or unintentionally. And this is where we need to bring alongside some professional counselors, some others who know what they're doing between adults that can help you get through this. And it might be hard for Generation 2 to come up with, to get to the point of creating a healthy relationship with you. Commonly what I see is the baby boomer aged fathers were either authoritarian or uninvolved and disengaged when the kids were 0 to 18. Now they've got money, but the kids are gone, and now they're trying to recreate the relationship they wanted to have. And sometimes that's met with a lot of stiff arming. Sometimes the kid is merciful enough to open up and get back together, but this is a tricky dance to have if you're trying to recreate something that wasn't there in the early years. Okay, so you might need some help getting through that together. Okay, so I hope that was clear enough with where you might have be landing on your parenting style and the effects of that. If any of that resonated with you, probably like, yep, that was me, or yep, that's what's happening to my child, then you kind of know where those styles are showing up these days. Okay. So now let's think about the approaches you can have today. Remember, there's always room for change. There's always room to get better or make things more meaningful for you. But with the authoritative approaches, if you happen to be in that camp, your kids are probably gonna be like, "Oh, you want to get together to talk about our inheritance? Sure. When do you want to get together? Where do you want to go? Let's talk. That's fantastic." You're going to be able to have an open discussion. You're going to be able to say, "Well, here's why mom and dad did that," and the kids are going to feel pretty good, and they're going to feel heard and valued. It's going to be not easy, but it's just going to be a little bit more effortless because there's this reciprocal respect. The trust is already there, and it just makes it easier to navigate those sensitive topics. So you might be able to have that family meeting on your own, or Sound Stewardship can guide that discussion for you. But that's going to be a fairly easy wealth transfer conversation to have. Okay. And this will probably strengthen the relationship even further because now you've opened up a whole another level of depth to the conversation when we're including your stuff heading down to them. Okay. On the authoritarian side, if you're still in that zone and that's how they see you, then you might want to send them a note ahead of time, kind of outlining what you're trying to do and what the reasons are behind them. You can try to get together, but you be prepared for some resistance. Some might be open to it, other kids may not be open to it, but let's kind of show them that you're trying to be more open and trying to have some empathy for what happened growing up. Because it was commonly a one-way conversation from you to them growing up, it may be challenging for them to have a two-way conversation with you now. Okay, we hope it's not, but this at least shows that you're trying to have a more open discussion about your resources and what you're trying to do for them. This might be your second chance or third or fourth to share with them, "Hey, mom and dad love you, and we've created a rock solid estate plan that's going to transfer wealth to you because we care about you." That they may not have heard that in a long time, but this might be the way to open up that dialogue. Okay. On the permissive side, of course they're going to want to get together. Let's have some fun, right? And it's going to be a friendly discussion. You might have to remember to be a little bit more focused on the topic instead of just having fun. But anyway, because the boundaries are a little squishy. They might be a little looser with their discipline. So you're going to need to be clear of what you've decided to do and help them know that there are boundaries. There's not just an endless pot of money here, just to avoid any misunderstandings. And um, they uh, they will most likely understand and respect the decisions you made because you have a good relationship with them. But if they struggle with boundaries and self-discipline, they might be licking their chops a little bit as to what might be coming
Yeah.
down the pike.
Yeah.
So you want to be really careful if we use dollar amounts or not, with the effect on the of permissive parenting, because they might get that number in their head. Like if you say, "Hey kids, $10 million is coming down the pike across 4 kids," immediately they're going to say, "Okay, 2.5 million, check. I've got that in my brain all of a sudden." Okay. And then what that can do is they'll say, "Hey, if I've got that coming, then I don't need to worry about all these other things I'm trying to do. I'll just wait for that to come down or ask for it ahead of time."
Yeah.
Okay. So we got to be real careful about that. Lastly, if you've been in the uninvolved camp and that relationship is strained, you probably need to get that neutral third party in place. Maybe you're already dealing with psychological counselors. We can be your money, your financial therapist, but we can't be your marriage and family therapist. So you need, maybe you already have them in place, but between us and the qualified therapist, we can facilitate the discussion if generation 2 is ready for it. Okay. And then you clearly lay out why are we getting together? This might be another second chance for you too. We're not trying to resolve all the emotional baggage that's happened over the years. That probably needs to be a separate discussion. But let's at least share that I care about you. I'm sorry I wasn't involved growing up, but now I care about you, or I still care about you, and want to provide those resources. If there's just a ton of emotional distance and then not coming to the table, that could happen. But let's keep trying, keep praying about it, keep talking to the therapist about it to see what we can do to get back together so that you can share what you're trying to do for them. Okay. Tough spot to be in, but get folks around you to help you there. Some additional considerations might look like this. What is the right location to get together? We host these meetings all the time at our Sound Stewardship office in Overland Park, Kansas. But you might have a lake house that you go to. You might have a favorite place you get together for Christmas. You might need to do Zoom because everybody's in a different city all over the country, and Zoom might be the best way to go. Okay. And then think about, are you more of a document person that you and your kids like to read stuff? Or are you more diagrams where a picture says 1,000 words? I have found some great breakthroughs in understanding when advisors like Derek and I understand the estate plan and the structure of it. And we're just drawing on the whiteboard with circles and squares and arrows and dollar amounts as to how's everything going to flow down to the surviving spouse and then to generation 2 and generation 3. That diagram tends to, everybody kind of gravitates to that, and there's a much greater understanding with the diagram. And you can do both. You can do documents and diagrams, but we find that the pictures speak 1,000 words. So then the other thing you might need to determine is, we can talk conceptually as to what types of accounts are coming to them, but then you got to decide, are we going to use actual balances or not? If we use actual balances, you just got to make sure that the children are either doing fine on their own and are going to be mature enough to say, you know what, whatever happens, happens, mom and dad. I'm not counting on that. Because if you do use balances and that they say, oh, well, I'll just wait for that to come, it could disconnect their drive to keep providing. It could. So just, your kids better than we do. So we can go all conceptual, no balances talked about, period. Or we can go full bore concepts, documents, balances, all the above. Okay. If you ask us to support the discussion with the kids, which is quite, I haven't said this yet, high privilege, honor for us to do, happy to help you with this. We can have a situation where you as the parent can do the talking and we support you. Or if you get stumped and, oh, what's that IRA stand for again? We can support you along the way. Or we can do a situation where you kind of tee up the conversation. We do the talking with your wonderful children, and then you can chime in with, "Hey, here's why mom and dad did that." See the difference? So it's all about the message you want to provide to the kids and the vibe you want to create. Okay. You can also make it to where there's a completely open floor for questions. Just kind of kids, whatever you want to ask. We're here to address those questions. Or you can say, I hope you enjoyed the revealing of our plan today. If you have questions and don't want to bring it up in front of everybody, just get back to us privately. We'll help you privately. Okay. So that just gives everybody the way they want to handle things. Okay. So we get that this is hard, but with our help, you can do it. Also through prayer and intentionally working on relationships with the right helpers, you can get through this. But it's an important task to go through to help the next generations understand you're going to be fine, and you've created a plan to pass resources down, and now we're helping you get in the know about what that is so that you can be prepared generation 2 and 3. Okay. So understand the three A's, your abilities, your audience, your approaches. We can help you with that during your quarterly meetings or whenever you want to talk about that. And then feel free to share our 7 Sound Stewardship Principles with your loved ones. We have a hard copy book that we can share with them, or we can do an ebook. So we can just email it wherever it is. I had the great privilege of talking to a 13-year-old son of our clients this summer. His grandfather, generation 1, brought him in, and he was, so generation 2 and generation 3 are in the meeting with me. And we just had a great discussion about him working and what's he trying to do with his resources. I gave him the paper booklet. I could have sent him the ebook because he's a digital native, but I thought, you know what? Here, have a book that you can read and then share with your younger brother and sister besides. So it just created a chance for us to have a dialogue. But mom and dad and the grandparents wanted me to do the I talk, and they listen. But then I was able to engage the 13-year-old really easily. He was a great kid, and we had a good discussion. So that's what's available for you as needed. Okay. Derek, any questions from
Yes. Yeah. Well, yeah, thank you for sharing that information there. A lot of things to reflect on. Some questions came up is, this for a lot, this can be like a new conversation. So like, what's an easy on-ramp to this? Is it just, hey, just a phone call, hey, we're going to talk about this? Or do you try to anchor it to something else that's going on? How do you go about getting to this family meeting, getting it scheduled and whatnot?
Yeah. You might be, these days, you've set your communication style with your kids. It could be texting, could be emailing, could be daily phone calls. So we'd probably start with whatever's normal for them and say, hey, remember we're getting together for Christmas this year? I'd like to have a little discussion with you guys as to what mom and dad are working on for our estate planning. Would you mind doing that? So if you have engagement with them throughout the year, that's not going to be super hard. If you are completely disconnected and there's this very distant relationship, that's going to be a different approach, but we can help you figure out what to do there.
Yeah. There might be some additional work you got to do on the front end to eventually get to your question or your ask of hey, I want to do a family meeting here.
Yeah.
What's if we've never done one of these before, like what's a good like time frame? What should we kind of roughly plan for of like how long should this meeting be? I don't want to be too short, but also I don't want to slug through all this information if it's just on kind of on the front end. Just what do you recommend around that?
Yeah, probably in some respects up to 90 minutes just to give them enough time to come in and get settled and warm up the discussion. And then if we're facilitating, then we're kind of having a joint dialogue with mom and dad, but kind of up to 90 minutes. We can get to the point, depending on a much higher level of wealth and the types of ongoing generational wealth we're talking about, that can turn into all day family meetings and exercises, that can turn into quarterly meetings. But for most families that are in that $1 to $10 million space, we can probably have the discussion across about 90 minutes and then have follow-up discussions as the kids have interest.
Okay. So could be annual basis maybe, or yeah, just as needed there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, you guessed that my dad and I have annual discussions because we're both financial advisor nerds, right? So once a year, he sits down with me specifically to share, hey, here's my updated financial plan. Here's mom and dad's estate plan. Here's some tweaks we made. So now that because I understand it all, now we're in an annual rhythm. He just shares with me any changes or updates that happen, and my mom can be involved in that discussion too. But and you might have that um, I hate to call it the most trusted child, but the one that understands it the most,
Yeah.
maybe that's the rhythm you get in with them, and then you bring in the other kids periodically at Christmas, Thanksgiving, 4th of July, kind of in the rhythm of your family. When are you commonly getting together anyway? Then let's pepper in this discussion so that everybody can be in the know. We're trying to remove erroneous expectations.
Yeah.
We want to give them clear information.
Yeah. Two more questions come through is, so we have this meeting, but at times, we'll have family discussions and it's like, oh, well, no, I thought you said this, or no, I'm pretty sure we agreed on doing that.
Mm-hmm.
How do you avoid those issues around this family meeting?
Yeah. Yeah. If sound stewardship is involved, what automatically happens with that, just like in our quarterly meetings, is we're taking notes along the way, but we're basically transcribing the meeting so that we know what conclusions did we come up with, who's doing what's our next step. So it's pretty clear. So if sound stewardship isn't involved, it's a simple matter of just even handwritten notes with conclusions. Then someone needs to send that out. I'd probably stick it on the parents, whoever called the meeting. The parents would kind of send out the conclusions of the discussion so that there's a written record, if you will, of how that went.
Yeah.
That's you had the verbal conversation, which is fantastic. I hope, but then it's that written communication afterwards that kind of helps set the parameters and the expectations.
Yeah. And then last question is, should these conversations be done like before the estate plan's already in place, or hey, we just updated it and then you're sharing, or we just created or updated it and then you're sharing the results? But where do you recommend the timing of the family meeting?
Yeah, good question. It commonly happens after a well thought out estate plan has been put together.
Mm-hmm.
However, if you have a good relationship with your children, you can say, hey, kids, mom and dad are putting together the estate plan in the next 6 months. Is there anything in particular that you're expecting, or is there any arrangement that you'd like to see happen? Not, let's see, like, for example, mom, dad, just please don't leave us with a mess. Or mom and dad, I know you might pick me to be the trustee, but I don't want to be the trustee. Please don't make me do it. Make my brother do it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So if you ask them ahead of time, then you're automatically signaling, oh, mom and dad are working on something, and then you can get some of their input there. Another thing we commonly see, if we're talking about their G2's kids, your grandchildren, G3, you can also bring up, hey, do you want us to help with education, either private K through 12 or college? Is that something you're wanting us to help, or do you want us to stay out of the way there?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's just never think that you're automatically helping someone by dumping money on a thing or on a project. It may not be helpful after all. It may actually cause more resentment than anything.
Yeah.
That
Yeah, it
happens.
brings up a good point of trying to look at it from all the different angles of where could this go right or where could this go wrong?
Yeah.
Who's it impacting? Is it impacting my, the bloodline? How is it impacting them? And how's it impacting the in-laws, outlaws,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. But we can help with those discussions pre-estate plan completion.
Yeah.
And then we'll get it done, and then we
Yeah.
can share the results. Mom and dad still have to make the call. I mean, it's still your money.
Yeah.
You're stewarding the money, so you still have to make the call.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's another thing to highlight too is with the estate plan, it's not set in stone until you pass away, right? So it's like we're going to be doing updates, whether it's from updates needed from relationship changes or needs changes or law changes. Like you just know that if you have one in place today, like there's probably going to need to be an update between now and the next, I don't know, maybe 5-10 years, whatever that time frame is. Like you're going to be need to make some changes, and so it just give yourself grace around there if you've already set it up and then you feel like you need to make a change. Like those things happen, and just get it done there. So
yep, and we'll help you get back to the attorney and be an advocate for you to get that taken care of, and then re-communicate the change you just made if you want to.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That's great. Thank you so much, Matt, for taking some time, your lunchtime there to share around this
Sure.
great topic. You're going to see this more and more. You're already seeing it in kind of the financial news. Like I said, there's a lot of money set to transfer from generation one to generation two. And so and this is one of the greatest wealth transfers the world's ever seen. So like, how do we get this right? And how do we make this a blessing and not a nightmare? And just clearly communicate through this process with our loved ones. And it's really just our goal is to love the next generation well and figuring out what does that look like. And so I think you provide a lot of helpful things to think about to kind of tee up the person to step into that family meeting there. That's really important. And so thank you for doing that there. We'll have some resources. We'll send the recording out to you guys that had joined the call and everybody that signed up for it. So stay tuned for that. If there's any other questions or things that you're wrestling with that you want to talk about, feel free to reach out to Matt or myself, like any of the advisors here, and we can help kind of start that conversation and kind of document things for you and just paint that clear picture for you. So, and we can provide some additional resources that might be helpful to you as well. So, but thank you all for joining the call today. Stay tuned. We'll send out some emails for this webinar, and then also some heads up for next month's webinar. And so stay tuned for those. But thank you guys so much for joining. Take care. Bye.
Have a good day, everybody.